Have you ever sort of peered into your own mind and wondered, is there a blueprint, a master plan for how all our incredible thoughts, memories, actions, how they all come together?
It really is the ultimate quest, isn't it? Understanding ourselves.
It is. And today we're taking a deep dive into something called cognitive architecture. It's basically the scientific mission to uncover the mind's fundamental structures and mechanisms.
Yeah, the real building blocks.
Exactly. And this deep dive, it's built on a whole stack of research, articles, insights, all pointing towards what some people call a unified theory of cognition.
A grand goal.
A grand goal indeed. So our mission here is to pull out the key nuggets, the most important bits, to help you understand this proposed standard model of the mind. A framework for how we perceive, think, learn, and act.
And it's quite a journey. The ideas have evolved in, well, surprising ways.
Get ready, because yeah, some of our deepest ideas about thought might just need a bit of rewiring after this.
That's a good way to put it. It used to feel like very separate camps, these opposing views on how the mind works, almost philosophical differences.
Right.
But what's really exciting now is seeing this synthesis emerge. It suggests these ideas aren't enemies. Maybe they're two sides of the same coin, leading us somewhere more unified.
Okay, rewiring our understanding. I like that. But before we get into that whole evolution, maybe let's lay some groundwork. What exactly is cognitive architecture, like fundamentally?
Sure. Okay, so at its core, cognitive architecture isn't just a vague theory. It's often a computational model, a working simulation trying to capture the mind's fundamental structures, its mechanisms.
Like a blueprint for intelligence.
Exactly like a blueprint for intelligence. The aim is to build a single integrated system that can, hopefully, produce the full range of human thinking and behavior from, recognizing a face to planning a complex trip.
So not just modeling one little task, but the whole system.
That's the dream. Moving beyond these fragmented little models towards a genuine unified theory of cognition. That was the big vision from pioneers like Alan Newell way back.
Okay, so if that's the goal, where did it all start? You mentioned opposing views earlier. What were those?
Right. Well, historically, the field was pretty split. You had on one side the symbolic camp, sometimes called the cognitivist paradigm.
Okay.
This was very much a top-down way of thinking. It's based on this core idea, the physical symbol system hypothesis, that intelligence basically comes from manipulating symbols like words, numbers, concepts, according to strict rules.
Like a computer program, if-then statements.
Exactly. Think of your mind as running this very complex software with lots of if-then rules.
Can you give an example of that kind of system?
Yeah, classic one is ACTR. It literally uses what are called production rules.
Right.
So if the goal is to solve this math problem, and I see this pattern, then apply this specific formula.
Okay, very logical.
Very logical. And it even models things like memory retrieval, how quickly you recall a fact. ACTR explains it with base level activation, like
Yeah.
every time you use a memory chunk, it gets a little boost, making it easier to grab next time. More popular facts pop up faster.
Makes sense.
And the strength of these symbolic systems is that they're great for high-level reasoning, planning, problem solving. You can often trace why they made a decision. Transparent.
But what's the downside?
They can be a bit brittle. If the world throws something unexpected at them, something not covered by the pre-programmed rules, they can really stumble. They often need a lot of knowledge loaded in up front.
Okay, so that's the top-down symbolic view. What was the other side?
The other side was the emergent or connectionist view. This is bottom-up. It takes its inspiration directly from the brain's structure, all those interconnected neurons.
Neural networks.
Exactly. The idea here is that cognition, thought itself, isn't driven by explicit rules, but it emerges from the complex interactions within these massive networks of simple processing units, all firing in parallel.
So knowledge isn't stored like a fact in a list.
No, it's distributed. It's in the strength of the connections between the units. It's more about the pattern of connections than specific symbols.
Right, more pattern recognition than rule following.
Precisely. And these systems are incredibly good at that. Recognizing faces, understanding speech nuances, finding subtle patterns in data, they learn directly from experience by adjusting those connection weights. Think of models like Liabra, which tries to use biologically plausible learning rules.
But they have weaknesses too, I assume.
Oh, definitely. The big one is often their opacity, the black box problem. It can be really hard to figure out how they reached a specific conclusion. And sometimes they struggle with tasks that require very precise, step-by-step compositional reasoning, combining known facts in brand new ways.
So a pretty fundamental clash there, rules versus patterns. How did the field move forward? Did they just agree to disagree?
Well, not exactly. This tension, this recognition that both approaches had real strengths and weaknesses, led to a more pragmatic phase,
Hmm.
the development of hybrid architectures.
Trying to get the best of both worlds.
Exactly, combining the strengths. Recognizing that human intelligence clearly uses both explicit reasoning and powerful pattern recognition.
How does that work in practice? Can you give an example?
Sure. Take a system called Clarion. It explicitly uses a dual process approach. It has an implicit subsymbolic layer think neural networks for skills, intuition, stuff you do without thinking consciously, like riding a bike.
Right, procedural stuff.
Yep. But it also has an explicit symbolic layer for clear rules, facts you can state. And the really neat part is how it learns. It can learn bottom up, like figuring out a general rule from lots of specific experiences, and top down, where knowing an explicit rule can help guide or speed up the learning of the skill.
That's clever. And you mentioned LIDA earlier, too.
Yes, LIDA is another great example. It's very bio-inspired, pulling in lots of different mechanisms. It uses things called codelets. You can think of them as tiny little software agents, specialists, constantly running in parallel, processing information, trying to make sense of things.
Little workers.
Kind of. And critically, LIDA explicitly tries to model consciousness using the global workspace theory. We'll definitely circle back to that idea later. It's important.
Okay, so hybrids were an attempt to bridge the gap. But you hinted at something even more recent, a bigger shift.
Yes. And this is where it gets really interesting and, frankly, quite surprising for many in the field. We've started seeing sophisticated, symbolic-like reasoning, things like logic, planning, emerging in purely connectionist systems.
Wait, you mean in systems that are supposed to be just bottom-up pattern recognizers, like the large language models, the LLMs?
Exactly like the LLMs.
Yeah.
This is shaking up the whole debate. It suggests that maybe symbolic processing isn't a fundamentally different type of computation after all.
So, what is it then?
It might be an emergent property, something that naturally arises when you have a connectionist system that's complex enough, adaptive enough, and works with continuous values. Yeah. So the mind might be this hierarchical thing where structured symbolic thought actually emerges from and is grounded in this flexible, statistical, subsymbolic base, a symbolic on-connectionist synthesis. It reframes the whole symbolic versus connectionist fight.
It's like discovering that the logical arguments you make are actually bubbling up from these deep statistical pattern-matching processes in your brain.
That's a great way to think about it.
That is a profound shift. Okay, so given all this complexity and evolution, why push for a single standard model of the mind? Why try to unify everything?
It's a fair question. Look at physics, right? They have the standard model of particle physics. It's not perfect, maybe, but it provides this incredible cumulative reference point.
Common ground.
Exactly. A standard model for the mind does the same. It helps guide research. Different scientists work on extending or refining different parts of the model within a shared framework. And crucially for AI, it gives us a much more robust foundation for building truly general human-like intelligence. It provides a common language, a shared objective.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've got the big picture, the historical context, this idea of an emerging synthesis. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty. How does this blueprint actually work? What are the core components? Let's start with memory. You said it's definitely not a hard drive.
Right. Please, let's banish the hard drive metaphor. It's so misleading. The first big distinction is between long-term memory, LTM, and working memory, WM. LTM is your vast storehouse. Everything you know, basically.
And that's split too, right?
It is, usually into two main types, declarative and procedural. Declarative memory is your knowing that memory, stuff you can consciously recall, declare, put into words.
Facts and events.
Exactly. It includes semantic memory, your general knowledge about the world, like Paris is the capital of France, dogs bark, the meaning of words, context-free facts.
Got it.
And then there's episodic memory. This is your personal memory bank. Specific events you experienced, your last birthday, what you ate for breakfast, that conversation yesterday. It's what allows for mental time travel.
Reliving the past in your head.
Kind of. But here's the really critical point, the one that trips people up. Episodic memory is not like a recording. It's fundamentally constructive.
Instructive.
Meaning every time you recall an episodic memory, your brain actively rebuilds it. It pulls together fragments. And in doing so, it can integrate new information, reinterpret things based on your current mood or beliefs. It's why memories change over time, why they can be inaccurate or even completely false. It smashes that library or video archive idea.
Wow. Okay, that's huge. So My memory isn't a perfect record. It's more like a story I retell myself each time.
That's a much better analogy, yes.
Yeah.
Dynamic reconstruction, not static retrieval.
Okay, so that's declarative, knowing that. What about the other kind of long-term memory?
That's procedural memory. This is your knowing how memory. It's for skills, habits, things you do automatically without conscious thought.
Like riding a bike.
Perfect example. Riding a bike, typing, playing a musical instrument, even social skills sometimes. You don't consciously retrieve the steps. Your body, your brain just does it. In those symbolic architectures like ACTR, these are often represented as those production rules we talked about, automatic if-then procedures.
And the hippocampus, the seahorse-shaped bit in the brain, that's important for memory, right? Where does it fit in?
Absolutely crucial, especially for declarative memory. The hippocampus isn't the final storage place for long-term memories, but it's vital for consolidation. Think of it as a temporary hub, or maybe an index, that helps bind together all the different elements of an experience, the sights, sounds, feelings, context.
Binding them together.
Yes, relational binding. And then, especially during sleep, it helps replay and strengthen these connections, gradually transferring the memory to the neocortex for more permanent storage. It makes those fragile new memories durable.
Okay, so that's the vast long-term memory store. What about working memory, the here and now?
Right, working memory, WM. This is the mind's active workspace, the stuff you're consciously aware of and manipulating right now. Think of it as your mental scratch pad.
The place where thinking happens.
Pretty much. The classic model here is Baddeley's multi-component model. It proposed a central executive like the conductor of the orchestra managing attention, and then slave systems, a phonological loop for holding verbal info, like repeating a phone number, and a visuospatial sketchpad for visual and spatial info, like picturing a map. Later, he added an episodic buffer to integrate info from different sources into a coherent scene.
Okay, sounds like different compartments. But isn't there another view? Cowan's model.
Yes, Nelson Cowan proposed the embedded processes model. His view is a bit different. He sees working memory not as separate boxes, but as activated portions of your long-term memory.
Activated LTM.
Yeah, with different levels of activation. And within that activated portion, there's a very small capacity-limited focus of attention, maybe only 3 or 4 items you can hold sharply in mind at once. The central executive, in this view, is what directs that focus of attention.
So are these models competing or complementary?
Increasingly, we see them as complementary. You can think of Baddeley's slave systems, phonological loop, sketchpad, as the sustained activation of specific types of representations within LTM, as Cowan suggests. And Baddeley's central executive is doing the job of directing Cowan's focus of attention. The episodic buffer isn't so much a separate box, but the functional outcome of the central executive binding information together within that attentional focus.
Okay, so the takeaway for you, the listener, is working memory is this active, limited spotlight of attention shining on knowledge pulled from your long-term memory. It's where conscious thought happens.
Precisely. Now, we can't talk about the mind without talking about how it connects to the world, right? The embodied interface, perception and action.
Cognition isn't just floating in a void.
Exactly. It's grounded in a physical body interacting with a physical environment. Take perception. It's not passive, like a camera just recording pixels. It's an active process. Your brain is constantly interpreting sensory input, building models, making sense of incomplete or ambiguous information, and it handles multiple senses at once.
Right, like integrating the sight and sound of a car approaching. How does the architecture handle that multimodal integration?
Different architectures do it differently. In LIDA, for instance, sensory information from different modalities might be processed somewhat independently first, then brought together in a common workspace. Higher-level processes then work to resolve conflicts or fuse the information into a coherent understanding of the situation.
And this perception then drives action.
Directly. The output of your perceptual processing constantly feeds into the cognitive cycle, informing what you should do next. This leads to action selection. Models like EPIC really focus on the tight, real-time loops between perception, cognition, and action.
And this brings us to the embodiment principle, the idea that our physical body shapes our intelligence.
Absolutely. Concepts aren't purely abstract. Think about up. It's deeply tied to our experience of gravity. Or how we understand grasping an idea relates to physically grasping objects. Some researchers, like Rodney Brooks with his subsumption architecture, argued that a lot of intelligent behavior emerges directly from simple sensor-motor couplings, without needing complex internal representations at all.
Wow, really bypassing the symbolic stuff.
For certain types of behavior, yes. For more complex architectures, embodiment is crucial for learning affordances, what actions the environment allows, and for grounding the symbols used in higher-level thought, giving meaning to abstract concepts through physical experience.
So if we pull this section together, memory isn't storage, perception isn't passive recording. What's the bigger picture here?
The bigger picture, the fundamental shift, is seeing both memory and perception as forms of inference.
Inference, like guessing or figuring things out.
Exactly. This is where the active inference framework provides a really powerful lens. It suggests the brain maintains an internal, generative model. Its best guess about how the world works and how sensory data gets generated.
Okay.
Perception, then, isn't just taking in data. It's your brain actively inferring the hidden causes behind your sensory signals, using its internal model. What's the most likely thing out there that would cause me to see and hear this?
Making sense of the input based on its expectations.
Precisely. And remembering, it's not retrieving a static file. It's your brain inferring a past state of that same generative model. What state was my model in previously that corresponds to this cue or question?
So the aha moment for you listening is, your memory isn't an archive. It's the dynamic current state of your brain's internal predictive model of the world, constantly being inferred and updated. Remembering is just querying that model about the past.
It's a profoundly different way to think about it.
It really is. Okay, that's memory and perception as inference. Now, how does the mind keep moving? Let's talk about the mind in motion cycles, streams, and learning. What's the cognitive cycle? You mentioned it earlier.
Right. The cognitive cycle is like the fundamental heartbeat of thought. It's a way to break down the continuous flow of cognition into discrete, repeating loops or steps.
Like clock ticks of the mind.
Sort of, yeah. In the standard model architecture, this cycle is central. It's often driven by procedural memory, those automatic if-then rules. In each cycle, based on what's currently in your working memory, one specific deliberate thought or action gets selected.
Okay.
That selection then updates working memory, maybe adding new information, setting a new goal, which then becomes the input for the next cycle. Perception, understanding action, perception, and so on.
And LIDA, the bio-inspired one, has a more detailed cycle.
Yes. LIDA's cycle is more elaborate, trying to map more closely onto potential brain processes. It explicitly includes stages like perception, then understanding, where it builds a current situational model using long-term memory, then attention consciousness, where different pieces of information compete for access to that limited global workspace.
The conscious spotlight.
Exactly. The winner gets broadcast consciously, which then guides action selection and, very importantly, triggers learning based on the outcome. It's a more complex, biologically flavored loop.
But if thought happens in these cycles, how do we get that smooth, continuous feeling, the stream of consciousness? It doesn't feel like a series of snapshots.
Great question. That feeling of continuity comes from two key mechanisms working together: iterative updating of working memory and multi-associative search.
Okay, iterative updating. What's that?
It means that when your focus shifts or a new thought occurs, the contents of your working memory aren't completely wiped and replaced. Instead, only a fraction might be replaced, while much of the previous content is sustained.
So there's overlap from one moment to the next.
Exactly. This creates a continuous overlapping blend of information over time. It smooths out the transitions between thoughts, giving you that subjective feeling of a flowing stream rather than discrete jumps.
How does the brain actually do that? Keep some things active while bringing in new ones?
The proposed mechanism involves different levels of neural activity. Items right in the sharp focus of attention might be maintained by very active, sustained neuronal firing. Things that were just in focus or are related but less central might be kept warm, so to speak, by slightly lower levels of activity or lingering synaptic potentiation, making them easily accessible but not demanding full attention.
Okay, so that's the continuity. What about multi-associative search? How does the next thought get selected?
This is how new items enter the stream. The idea is that all the items currently coactive in your working memory don't just act as separate cues. They form a combined, complex pattern, a kind of parallel search query.
A combined query?
Yeah. This combined pattern spreads activation out into your vast long-term memory. It tends to converge on and activate new items that are strongly associated with the entire constellation of things you're currently holding in mind. Not just one cue, but the whole context.
So your current thoughts collectively pull related ideas into the stream.
Precisely. It drives the stream of thought forward in a coherent, contextually relevant way.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about learning? Where does adaptation fit into these cycles and streams?
Learning isn't separate. It's the engine of adaptation, and it's woven into the fabric of cognition, happening continuously, often within every cognitive cycle. A good architecture needs multiple learning mechanisms.
What kinds are we talking about?
Well, there's perceptual learning, getting better at processing sensory information, like a radiologist learning to spot tumors. There's declarative learning, acquiring new facts, semantic memory, and events, episodic memory. This includes that idea of a transient episodic memory, which then needs consolidation, likely involving the hippocampus, to become durable long-term knowledge.
Right, and skills.
That's procedural learning, getting better at doing things. In symbolic systems, this often happens through mechanisms like chunking or production compilation, where a sequence of steps gets automated into a single, smooth skill, like learning a keyboard shortcut until it's automatic.
Okay. Any other types?
There's also attentional learning, learning what's important to pay attention to in the first place. In LIDA, this might involve tuning those attention codelets so they get better at highlighting relevant information based on past success.
And LIDA also has this specific hypothesis about consciousness and learning.
Yes, the conscious learning hypothesis. It proposes that for significant non-trivial learning to occur, especially for declarative or episodic knowledge, the information usually needs to pass through that conscious global broadcast. The idea is that consciousness plays a key role in consolidating important new information.
Interesting. So paying attention and being aware helps things stick.
That's the suggestion. Now, what's really fascinating, mathematically speaking...
Uh-oh, math.
No, it's conceptually powerful. This whole cognitive cycle, going from your current mental state, your prior belief about the world, to an updated state after processing new information, your posterior belief, could actually be formalized as a step of Bayesian inference.
So the mind cycle is like constantly updating probabilities, calculating the odds.
In a way, yes. It provides a rigorous mathematical underpinning. It connects beautifully back to the active inference framework we talked about. Each cycle of thought is your brain refining its probabilistic model of the world, trying to make better predictions.
Okay, constantly predicting, constantly updating. That leads us nicely into thinking about control. The executive mind, control, reflection, drive. This is where the prefrontal cortex, the PFC, comes in, right? The brain's CEO.
Exactly. Executive functions are the high-level processes that manage and coordinate all the other cognitive functions to achieve goals. And yes, the PFC is the primary neural real estate for this.
It's not just one thing, though, is it? What are the components?
No, it's a suite of abilities. Key ones include working memory and goal maintenance, actively holding information online that's relevant to your current goal, like remembering the instructions while assembling furniture. The dorsolateral PFC, DLPFC, is heavily involved here.
Keeping things in mind. What else?
Inhibitory control. Absolutely crucial. This is your ability to suppress distractions, irrelevant thoughts, or prepotent but inappropriate actions. Resisting the urge to check your email while working. The ventrolateral PFC, VLPFC, and areas like the basal ganglia are key players.
Focus and resistance. Got it.
Then there's cognitive flexibility, your mental agility, the ability to switch between tasks, adapt your strategy when things change, think outside the box, like realizing your usual route is blocked and quickly figuring out an alternative. Right frontal regions seem particularly important here.
Being adaptable.
And the really sophisticated stuff. Planning and problem solving. Breaking down a complex goal into manageable steps, anticipating obstacles, mentally simulating different scenarios and their outcomes. Your PFC is working overtime here, and computational models are trying hard to capture this, sometimes even integrating LLMs to help with the planning part.
Okay, so that's the CEO managing ongoing tasks. What about reflecting on how well the CEO is doing?
Now you're talking about metacognition, literally thinking about thinking. It's the mind's ability to monitor, evaluate, and regulate its own cognitive processes.
Like realizing you don't actually understand something you just read.
Exactly. Or noticing that the strategy you're using to solve a puzzle isn't working and deciding to try a different approach. It's self-awareness and self-regulation of your own thoughts.
Is there a model for how that works?
Yes, the Carina architecture is a good example of a computational model of metacognition. It explicitly has two levels: an object-level loop that deals with the external world or the task at hand, and a meta-level loop that observes the object level.
Watching itself work.
Pretty much. It uses introspective monitoring. It observes its own reasoning steps, looks for errors, detects impasses. If it finds a problem, the meta-level control kicks in. It might try to generate an explanation for the failure, set a new meta goal, like understand this concept better, and select a new strategy to fix the object-level problem. It's like having an internal quality control supervisor.
An internal coach, like you said. Okay, so we have control, reflection, but what about the spark? Consciousness, motivation.
Right. A full picture needs to address consciousness and motivation. Consciousness, rather than being some spooky mystery, can be understood functionally. Global Workspace Theory, GWT, which is central to LIDA, provides a compelling computational role.
We keep coming back to GWT. Remind us of the core idea.
The idea is you have lots of unconscious specialized processors doing their thing in parallel. They compete for access to a limited capacity global workspace. Whichever information wins this competition gets broadcast globally throughout the system. That broadcast is the content of consciousness.
And what's the point of that broadcast?
Its function is crucial. System-wide coordination, recruiting different resources needed for the current task, enabling flexible responses, and, as we mentioned, facilitating certain types of learning and memory consolidation. It makes information widely available.
Okay, so consciousness as a functional broadcast system. What about the drive, the why?
That's motivation and emotion. A cognitive system can't just compute. It needs goals, drives, reasons to do anything. Motivation sets those fundamental goals: survival, seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, curiosity, social connection.
How does that get built into an architecture like LIDA?
In LIDA, they use mechanisms like feeling nodes that carry affective valence, a positive or negative emotional tag. These feelings influence what captures attention, what gets learned, and what actions are selected. The system is biased towards actions that lead to positive feelings and away from those leading to negative ones.
And briefly, understanding others, theory of mind.
Yes, theory of mind, Tom. Our ability to infer others' intentions, beliefs, desires. This is also crucial for navigating the social world.
Now, if we try to tie these executive functions back to that bigger active inference picture, how does that work? Planning seems key.
It is. And active inference offers a really elegant way to frame executive functions, especially planning, as hierarchical predictive control.
Okay, unpack that. Hierarchical predictive control.
Think about a goal. A goal is essentially a desired future state, right? I want to be holding a cup of coffee. In active inference, you can reframe that goal as a top-down prediction. Your executive system essentially imposes a strong internal belief, a prediction, that you will be in that future state.
So my brain predicts I am holding coffee, even before I am.
Exactly. It sets that as a high-level prior belief. Then, the rest of your cognitive machinery, perception, action planning, motor control, all work together to make that prediction come true. They generate actions like walking to the kitchen, getting a mug, brewing coffee, that will lead to sensory input consistent with the prediction, I am holding coffee. The aim is always to minimize the prediction error between the goal state and the current state.
So planning becomes figuring out the sequence of actions that best fulfills the top-down prediction.
Precisely. It transforms the somewhat vague idea of a supervisory system into a very specific, computationally grounded process of inferring actions to realize predicted futures. It's all about minimizing future prediction error.
Wow. Okay, this is all building towards a unified model. Is there a way to put all these pieces, memory, perception, cycles, control, prediction, together into one coherent picture?
That's the ultimate aim. And the active inference imperative, rooted in the free energy principle, serves as the highest level unifying principle for such a model.
Remind us of that principle again. Minimize surprise.
My surprise, or prediction error, yes. The core idea is that any self-organizing system that wants to stick around like a living brain has to act in ways that keep it within expected viable states. It does this by constantly trying to minimize the mismatch between what it expects to sense and what it actually senses. This single drive becomes the glue.
So, under this umbrella, perception is inference. We build our reality by inferring the causes of sensations based on our internal model.
Check. And action is inference. We act on the world specifically to gather sensory evidence that confirms our predictions, essentially making the world match our model.
Check. And learning is model optimization. We continually refine that internal generative model to make better predictions in the future, reducing long-term error.
Check. It all flows from that one principle.
So what would the architecture of a mind built on this principle look like?
It would likely be a hierarchical predictive system, functionally quite elegant, actually, capable of generating complex behavior from these core predictive mechanisms.
Okay, break down the hierarchy. What's at the bottom?
At the base, you have the representational substrate.
Yeah.
This is fundamentally your long-term memory, your internal world model. It needs a flexible, probably connectionist subsymbolic foundation, good at learning statistical regularities probabilities like those deep neural networks.
The pattern matcher.
Right. But emerging from that foundation, you need a layer capable of representing more structured, explicit, even symbolic knowledge. Maybe something flexible like archigraphs, annotated knowledge graphs, that can integrate text, images, rules, maybe even outputs from neural nets. A rich, multimodal representation of the world.
Okay, so that's the knowledge base. What runs on top of it? The engine.
Next up is the core cognitive engine. You can think of this as the FAST system, System 1. It handles the moment-to-moment, largely unconscious flow of thought.
The cognitive cycle we talked about.
Exactly. Each turn of this engine functions like a single step of Bayesian inference within that cognitive cycle. It's driven by that iterative updating of working memory and the multi-associative search. Your current focus, the prior, queries the world model, updates the focus, forming the posterior, and propels the stream of thought.
Fast, associative, largely automatic. What about deliberate thought?
That's the job of the executive control system, the slow system, System 2. This is your conscious, effortful, goal-directed planning and problem-solving system, implementing those PFC functions.
How does it work in this predictive framework?
Its main mechanism is likely a hierarchy of nested covert loops. Essentially, it uses the core cognitive engine to run mental simulations, imagining future scenarios, playing things out internally on fictive or hypothetical states without actually acting.
Running simulations in your head.
Right. This allows it to evaluate different possible action sequences, find plans that are predicted to minimize future error, i.e. achieve the goal, and then select the best plan. That selected plan then becomes a strong top-down prediction that guides the core engine and subsequent actions.
Okay, world model, core engine, executive control. Is there anything higher?
Yes, the metacognitive system, the reflective system. This provides longer-term oversight and adaptation. Like the Carina model, it monitors the overall performance of the agent, paying particular attention to persistent high levels of prediction error over longer timescales.
Signaling when things are consistently going wrong.
Exactly. If prediction error stays stubbornly high, it suggests the current model or strategies aren't working well. This triggers the metacognitive system to initiate deeper changes. Maybe model learning, actually restructuring parts of the world model, or strategy adaptation of adjusting how the executive control system plans or selects actions. It's learning how to learn how to think better.
And driving all of this.
The motivational system providing the fundamental goals, needs, and values that shape the top-down predictions and bias attention and learning. It gives the whole system direction and purpose.
Wow. Okay, that's a complex but coherent picture. Can we walk through an example to see how it all clicks together? You used planning a trip earlier.
Sure, let's use that. Planning a multi-stop trip to an unfamiliar city.
Okay, where does it start?
It starts at the motivational system. Maybe a drive for novelty or a need for a break generates a high-level goal. Take a trip. This goal gets passed up to the executive system.
Right. Then the executive control system takes over.
Yes. It translates take a trip into a high-level top-down prediction like, I am at the destination enjoying myself. Then it decomposes this big prediction into smaller, necessary sub-predictions. Book flight, book hotel, plan itinerary. It decides to focus attention first on the sub-prediction book flight.
Okay, book flight is now the target prediction. What happens next?
That prediction, book flight, enters the focus of attention in the core cognitive engine. This immediately triggers a multi-associative search of the world model, your LTM. It activates related knowledge, airlines, price ranges, booking websites you trust, perhaps memories of past flight searches.
Your focus fills with flight-related stuff.
Right. The focus iteratively updates as these associations are explored. The core engine, guided by the book flight prediction, might then generate a specific, low-level action prediction like predict sensory input consistent with searching kayak.com.
Which leads to action.
Yes, your motor system acts on that prediction. Typing, clicking. Your perception system processes the resulting sensory input, the website appearing on screen. This new evidence flows back into the core engine, updating its state, confirming or disconfirming its micro-predictions about the website. Prediction error is minimized at this low level.
Okay, but what if the search results are all terrible? No good flights found, persistent error.
Good point. If multiple attempts fail, leading to sustained high prediction error related to the book flight sub-goal, the metacognitive system detects this pattern. It recognizes a failure in the current strategy.
The internal coach steps in.
Exactly. It might trigger a meta-level intervention. It signals the executive system. this approach isn't working. The executive system then adapts its strategy, perhaps generating a new sub-prediction like be more flexible with dates or check train options instead, and directs the core engine accordingly. It changes the plan based on the failure signal.
Makes sense. And assuming it eventually succeeds and you take the trip.
Then the whole experience, the successful planning, the navigation, the sights, the sounds, the outcomes, provides rich data. During rest and sleep, the hippocampus helps consolidate these experiences, integrating them into your world model. Your semantic knowledge about the city, airlines, and episodic memories of the trip itself are updated. Your internal predictive model becomes more accurate for future travel planning. Learning has occurred.
That's a fantastic walkthrough. It really shows how the pieces interact dynamically.
It aims for that integrated flow, yes.
So if we boil it all down, the core unifying idea of this whole deep dive is the mind as a prediction machine.
That's really the essence of it in this unified model. Perception, action, memory, reasoning, they're all different facets of the same fundamental drive. Minimizing prediction error. Your brain is constantly actively trying to predict what's coming next at multiple levels, and then acting and learning to make those predictions better or make the world conform to them.
It's a powerful and maybe even slightly unsettling way to think about ourselves.
It can be, but it also offers incredible explanatory power.
And this blueprint, this predictive model, it isn't just academic, is it? It's about understanding ourselves, yes, but also about building the future, especially with AI.
Absolutely. And it immediately raises questions about the remaining frontiers, things we haven't fully mapped onto this framework yet.
Like what? What are the big open questions or areas for development?
Well, emotion, for instance. While motivation is included, the rich tapestry of human emotion is complex. One promising angle within active inference is to view emotions as arising from predictions about our internal bodily states, our interoception. Feeling anxious might be a prediction of certain physiological stress responses.
Interesting. What else?
Social cognition, especially theory of mind. How do we predict what others are predicting? The idea of using those internal covert loops to simulate another person's mental state, running a prediction of their predictive model, is a very active area of research.
Simulating other minds.
Yep.
And creativity. Where does novelty come from in a prediction machine?
That's a great question. Creativity might involve several things within this framework. Perhaps deliberately biasing that multi-associative search towards weaker, less obvious connections, or maybe temporarily reducing the precision or confidence in high-level predictions, allowing the system to explore more freely without being constrained by strong expectations. Playing with the prediction process itself.
Letting the system wander a bit. And consciousness. Does this framework really explain the feeling of being aware?
It provides a functional account that aligns well with theories like GWT. The conscious broadcast of the winning information from the workspace competition, combined with that iterative updating that creates the smooth stream that is the proposed mechanism for the subjective experience of consciousness. It explains the function and the flow, though the deep why of subjective experience itself remains a profound question.
Okay. So lots still to explore, but a powerful framework, which brings us to the final thought for our listeners.
Yes. This blueprint for intelligence, this prediction-driven model, isn't just about understanding human minds. We're actively trying to build artificial minds based on similar principles.
And they're getting powerful.
Extremely powerful. So the real challenge, the question for you to really grapple with is this. As our AI systems start to mimic this predictive complexity, perhaps even develop their own internal models and goals driven by error minimization, how do we ensure these powerful predictive minds we're creating are not just smart, but wise? Wise and aligned with the human values, the ethics, the kinds of futures we want to predict and make real. How do we build AIs that don't just predict, but predict in ways that benefit all of us? That's the challenge ahead.